Hi friends, welcome to my channel. For those of you that are new here, my name is Katelyn and I like to film eyeshadow palette ranking and review videos, as well as the occasional other content sprinkled in. So if you like indie makeup, if you like eyeshadow palettes, if you like me, I highly recommend that you hit that subscribe button because I post 2 videos every single week. And for those of you that are not new here, my face is happy that you are seeing it again. And let's put an asterisk next to the 2 videos a week because I don't know when this is going up. I don't know when I am due with my child any day now, so anywho, this might be going up way later, but we're going to rank all of the eyeshadow palettes that I used in February. That's right, exactly what you heard. Every eyeshadow palette that I used in February, whether it's new, whether it's old, whether it's something in between, we're ranking it. So let's go ahead and get on into it. Okay, so I typically, in my rankings, I like to do 4 categories, and I split my palettes into the category. I do rank my palettes in order still from least liked to most liked, so if that's what you're looking for, they are still in that order. I just don't read off the numbers while I'm doing it, and I intentionally put them into the categories because I feel like that's a little bit more accurate. I have decided to change my categories because I felt like the categories I was using before weren't, I don't know, I was struggling to like kind of put things in certain places, and then the bottom category, I think I had at least a couple months where there wasn't a ton happening. Anyways, long story short, we have new categories, so let me walk through them really fast. So our bottom category is going to be palettes that I feel like if they disappeared from my collection, I wouldn't be that upset about it. And I feel like that's harsh, but previously that category was for palettes I want to declutter. I'm not saying I want to declutter these palettes. I'm just saying if they broke, shattered, I'd be like, all right. You know, like I wouldn't be that upset about it. Now, does that mean that maybe down the line sometime I will declutter them? Possibly. But anyways, that is the bottom category. The third category will be palettes that I like, but just have a few things that I want to note about them. So I like them. That's it, period. The next category are palettes that I love, that I would describe as feeling like, oh, I love that. And I would highly recommend, think they're amazing. The last and top category are Holy Grail favorites. So I did want to differentiate because I have a ton of palettes that I love, but I wouldn't quite put them in Holy Grail status yet. And so that's what I want to differentiate. I will be honest, in having these different categories, it makes it harder for new palettes to hit into the Holy Grail, because it's hard for me to say a new palette is a Holy Grail right away, but you know, it's I feel like it's helpful to at least, you know, see over time as I continue to use palettes, do they move up the line, yes or no? So some quick things I purchased one, like, so I'm doing a low buy, a low-ish buy it's a low buy for me, probably not a low buy for other people, but I'm allowed to purchase 3 to 4 palettes per month. I say 3, and then if there's something that launches towards the end of the month, then I can, you know, grab that and hit the 4th, but no more than 4 palettes per month that I'm allowed to purchase. So I purchased 1 palette at the end of January that I didn't receive until February, so that is one of the new palettes that we'll be talking about. And then I purchased 3 palettes in the month of February. I actually just purchased a 4th, didn't I? I think I did. It's the Ensley Cosmetics, the Groovy Garden palette. That's what's on my eyes today. Actually, you're not going to see this in this ranking because I didn't try it till March. But anyways, so there you go. And then I was gifted the 3 Odin's Eye palettes in PR. So we have a total of 7 new palettes that we'll be talking about, and then 2 palettes that are new to me in the ranking. And I will mention those as we go because I do like to note like what's new to me, yada, yada, yada. Anywho, okay, I think that's enough business discussion. Oh, if you're curious, I am wearing the Chelsea Smith Cosmetics wig in Nicole Luxe, right? Yes, Nicole Luxe, if you're curious. But anywho, let's go ahead and get started. So I believe, if I can count correctly, there are 20 palettes. So in our 20th spot, in our bottom category, which is, you know, if it disappeared, I wouldn't be that upset about it, is the Esom Cosmetics, the Artistry palette. This is the number 4 Elevate Pigment palette. It is the colorful one. I feel like if you've watched my videos, you've seen this sort of slide down in rankings over time. And it's the more I use this palette, the more I am frustrated by it. It just doesn't give me what I want it to give me. These two rows at the bottom here, those shimmers are the smoothest, creamiest thing I have ever touched in my life. They are butter. They don't have a ton of sparkle to them, but they do shine. But I would say that they're not going to be like your indie shimmers that you're used to. So for me, I'm like, okay, that's fine because you have these toppery shades up here and I can add the sparkle in, but these don't add the sparkle that I want. And then this green one here, it reflects so gold, it's not green, and it bugs me. So this one, just the more I use it, the more I just don't really like it as much as I would have liked. I think the two neutral ones that they have are better. I think they have a nice formula. It's just there's something about this one that I don't know. I like the formula of the neutral shimmer palette better, which if you look at their website, they'll describe the shades. You'll see that they have different finishes on that other shimmer palette. Anywho, next up for this category, I feel really bad about it, but this is the Odin's Eye and Judy collab, the Spring Dragon palette. And this is entirely personal preference. There's no issues with the quality on this one. I just don't like pastel eyeshadows, so this isn't really for me, and that's okay. Not everything has to be for everybody. I tried to do a neutral look with just using kind of like the pinky, like a pinky neutral look, just using the pinky shades, and I really didn't like those tones of pinks on me. It's just not my favorite. I do think the shimmer down here is really beautiful and sparkly. All of the shimmers are beautiful and sparkly, but Dew in particular, I like the color of that one. So I do think the formula of these for a pastel palette, if you were looking for a pastel palette, is nice. It's just for me personally, I don't reach for pastels all that often. I do want to try and play with this with her Red Dragon palette because I think that might be really cool with the tones of the neutrals in that palette to pair that with some of the pastels. So I need to do that, but yeah, that's where I'm at with that one. So moving on into the next category, all of these palettes I like. There's just going to be little nitpicky things for me. So first up, we have the Laura Geller and Wheel of Fortune palette. I like this palette, I think, more than I probably should. It's a good palette. Like my issue with it is mainly just that it's a more boring color story, but sometimes you want a more boring look, you know? I do like that you can do something really glam and smoky, and that you can do something really not light, neutral, perfect for work type of look. I've liked every look I've done with this. The shimmers and the mattes surprise me every time. I think this is really nice. It's just not, compared to the other palettes that I have, it just doesn't spark that same like, ooh, you know, type of feeling. And I will say, I feel like the edges on this are kind of sharp a little bit. So not that that means anything, but next up we have the Viseart Petit Pro Midsummer palette. This is what the palette looks like. It's a cute little 8-pan, I can't count, 8-pan palette that leans a little bit on the pinky tones. It's a similar vibe to the Laura Geller Wheel of Fortune. If I'm looking at them right now, I probably could have swapped these two, but I have a special place in my heart for the Viseart formula. Also, what I liked about this one is this shimmer shade down here is really pretty and metallic and can get really foiled with some, with like a wet brush, although so can the Laura Geller ones. So I don't know, I probably could have swapped those, but overall, they're just kind of like basic neutral palettes. I still like them, but not as much as I like some of the other stuff in my collection. Next up, we have the Wicked Widow Lovesick palette. So this is, well, I mentioned the Spring Dragon palette from Odin's Eye and Judy. That was the first new palette for the month of February. This is the second new palette for the month of February for me. This is the, like I said, the Lovesick palette. I thought this was going to have more variety to it than it actually does. To me, it still all leans really pinky purpley, and it's not quite monochromatic, but it's essentially pinks and purples, and I feel like they did a better job curating a more interesting color story with their other 8-pan that I've tried, which is the Graveyard Smash palette. So this one just was a little bit disappointing to me. I do think the shades in here are really beautiful. All of the shimmers are gorgeous. The mattes worked really nicely. So again, not a quality issue, just a color story preference. Next up, we have one of the new to me palettes, which is the Glamlight and Rick and Morty collab. Some of you may remember that I wanted this palette so bad. I bought it in January and didn't use it until actually just a few days ago, the end of February. So finally used it. I did a pretty bright and colorful look with it, and I liked it a lot. I feel like the neons in this palette are definitely neon. They're super pigmented, super bright. I had significant staining with these purple shades that I used over here. Wherever I had placed those stayed like hot pink so I did it at night. After I did it, I double cleansed, used makeup remover, and it was like eye makeup remover specifically, and it was still like pink on my lids. Went to sleep, woke up the next morning, cleansed again, eye makeup remover again, still had that pink there. And I was actually going to wear like a light neutral look to work that day because I had a meeting, and I couldn't because the pink was coming through too much. So I ended up going for it. It's actually when I pulled out that Esom palette, I just went for the purples in there because I was like, whatever, I can do like a purple look and not have it look that wild. But anyways, so the staining kind of brought this down a little bit for me, but I do still think this is a really fun color story, and I think the neons perform really well. I just want to use it a little bit more. If it's just the purples and that pink shade that stain, it's probably not the end of the world. I'll just have to be mindful of when I do use them, knowing that I'm going to have to do a colorful look or like a deeper look the next day to cover it up. After that is another new palette for the month of February. This is the Unearthly Cosmetics Gloomy Gardens palette. I really like this palette. I think it has a really fun color story. I saw somebody post, I think it was Monica, the owner of this brand. She posted that it like is meant to be sort of the sister palette to her BellaBeauteBar collab, which was Celestial Garden. And I need to double check if I actually decluttered that one already or not. I know I put it in my declutter basket, but I don't know if it's left the building. If it hasn't, I absolutely want to do a look combining those two, because when she showed them next to each other in her story, I was like, wait a second, that's gorgeous. I love that. So I really want to try that out. And what that palette never, like I felt like I was missing was like deeper shades, and I'm like, okay, like I want to try it. So anyways, I enjoy this palette. I really like it. As far as why I have it in the light category, I've only played with it a couple of times and it didn't blow me away. And that's a really weird complaint to have because it also didn't disappoint me, but it was just sort of like, okay, yeah, the mattes worked. The shimmers look pretty. Like it just wasn't, I don't know. I think I was expecting to be like mind blown, and it hasn't quite done that yet. I do like the look that I did with it. Here's where I'll say these matte shades require some building. They're not quite as like bam in your face, but it's also kind of more of a murky like toned down color story. So I think that plays a role into it. But anyways, long story short, I think it might be the mattes that are kind of not quite there for me, and that's why I just like it. Next up is the BellaBeauteBar The Sun and the Sea palette. I have a sad update for everybody. I think I pointed out when I did my eyeshadow palette collection that this shade was crumbled, but I had tried repressing it. Well, as soon as I finished that video, the whole thing fell out. So my repressing skills were not great. But anyway, so we lost Deep Dive. I'll be honest though, I think I used to complain that Waves and Deep Dive were like, there was barely a difference with them or between them. Deep Dive was just like slightly darker, but they didn't like blend into each other. Like they were too close to blend into each other. So anyways, I'm not that mad about it. I still feel like I get the overall gist of the color story. Anywho, I struggle with this palette solely because these shades up here are so similar and I wish I had a little bit more variety in the mattes, but the shimmers in here are so pretty. So that's why I do like this palette, and I would be sad if anything like happened to it, and that's why it's in this category and not the first category, because I feel like it's just gorgeous. Like I did a look with some, I used the Petit Pro Midsummer palette. I don't think I took pictures of this look. I did the Petit Pro Midsummer palette and just like worked some of those into the crease and then just plopped Sandcastle all over the lid, and then that shimmer that's in that other palette in the inner corner. Anyways, It was an easy look that took me like 2 minutes because I was in a huge rush, and it was so pretty. And I'm like, see, that's what I like about this palette, is that you can get such a pretty look so easily with it. And, you know, it's always fun to have like a mermaid. Last palette in this category is the Lightwork Volume 5, the I Am palette. I always forget that I still have this in here. Anyways, here's the palette. I used it this month and I felt like, okay, the mattes I paired it with, I liked a little bit better. I didn't go for a monochromatic look. I leaned into some of the shiftiness, and I still like it. What I think hurts this palette is that I loved Lightwork 4. I still love Lightwork 4 so much. I also love the Groundwork palette. Like, both of those are holy grails for me. Spoiler on one of them, because I did use them in the month of February, or one of them in the month of February. But anyways, they're both holy grail palettes for me. And then this was like, it was good. It was fine. It was, you know, like there's nothing wrong with the formulas. I actually really like all the formulas in here. I like the ability to layer and do something funky and different, but it just doesn't, I don't know. It just doesn't, haven't developed that connection to it that I have the other two, and so it just feels disappointing because I love those two palettes from the brand so much. So yeah, is that a weird thing? I don't know. Do you all ever have that where you have a brand that you love everything they do, and then they do something and you're like, yeah, it's good, but I mean, I'm used to greatness, you know, which I don't think is fair. It's not fair to hold that up, because, you know, there's some palettes I have in here that I'm like, I rank this higher. This palette maybe has better quality, but because I'm so in love with like their other stuff, it's like, you see what I'm saying? Anyways, whatever. Next category are the palettes that I do love. So if you'll notice though, like just to, you know, be nice, this is the top palette in the light category. It like borders on love. It's like pretty close. It's just not quite there yet. Anyways. That's all I wanted to say. So moving on to the love category, we have another one of the palettes that I was gifted in PR. This is the Odin's Eye and Fancy Face collab, the Earthwood palette. I have used this palette twice. I really like both looks. At first, I was sort of like, ooh, that's an interesting color story. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it. But as I played with it, I realized that a lot of these shades kind of play into and play with each other really, really nicely. And I have lots of other ideas for looks. I don't have this one in the Holy Grail category, and I have it where it's at. Not because there's anything wrong with the quality. I actually think the quality on this one is really, really nice. I did have pretty significant fading with this shade down here. Like I got a bald patch on my eye, but otherwise I feel like the shadows performed really well. I really liked the color story. I like that I can kind of do a neutrally look, or I can do something a little bit more colorful. It's definitely giving all the spring vibes. It's really, really nice. Like I said, in the love category, I highly recommend all of these. It solely comes down from here on out to personal preference. Like everything else, I have maybe something that I want to nitpick, but the rest of these, I really like them, and it's truly color story preference. So next up, we have the other palette I was gifted in PR. This is the Mighty Monster palette from Annette, from Annette's Makeup Corner and Odin's Eye. Here's the inside of the palette. I really like this palette. I love this shade Glow Vortex down here. I saw Annette do a look with this shade all over her lid and a wing, and I really want to recreate that because I thought that looked so, so pretty. And I know she mentioned this formula appears a little bit different, so I want to play around with this one more, but I really have been enjoying it so far. Next up is another new palette. This was the palette that I purchased at the end of January, but didn't use until February. Anyways, it's the Unearthly Cosmetics Charmer palette. This is from their Valentine's Day mystery box. So if you don't want to see what is inside of this, just like skip ahead a little bit, but I'm going to reveal it. They've already revealed it on their page, so I don't know if it's that much of a secret anymore. Anyways, here we go. So here's the inside of this palette. It is such a fun color story. Somebody pointed out that it looks like the Give Me Glow Bad Witch Club palette color story, but like a condensed version, and I think were right about that. I would love to pair the two palettes together, or just kind of line them up, but I really like that palette, and I like this palette a lot so far. I think the shades in here are super beautiful. It's enough of an interesting color story that it forces me to think outside of the box. I do want to play with this one more and still kind of like getting a feel for it, but the formulas in here so far are really nice, and right off the bat, it created one of my favorite looks I've ever done. So you know, I gotta give it props for that. Next up, we have the Unearthly Cosmetics Dreamer palette. This palette is beautiful. I put this one above Charmer because I've used this one more than I've used Charmer, and I feel like it's not fair to like leapfrog Charmer until I've had a chance to play with it a little bit more. Plus, this palette, I feel like I have more variety in that I can go really neutral or, you know, kind of pinky mauvey neutral, cool tone neutrals, or I can do something a little bit more colorful. I just feel like it's a variety. I also think these two palettes would play really nicely together because if you wanted to do like a neutral and a colorful look, I think they would work super well together. So, I don't know. That's my thoughts on that. Next up, we have the Ensley Cosmetics, the Cold Moon palette. I really like this color story. The shimmers in here are so beautiful. I love all of the formulas. They did more than just their special shades in here. They have some like not standard shimmers, but shimmers that are not like your duochrome, multichrome, super chunky textured shades. They have a wide variety of shimmer formulas in here, which I really like and appreciate. It gives more variety to the palette. And I've yet to do a look I didn't like with, or did I? There might have been one look where I combined this palette with another palette and I was kind of like, turned out okay. But for the most part, I've loved every look I've done with this palette. So I really enjoy this. It just all leans cool tone, which is what the palette is supposed to do. So it's not like it's doing anything. It's not like you got a super colorful palette and you're like, everything somehow looks the same. Like this is definitely a cool tone palette that pulls cool tone. So you know, no surprises there. It's just, again, personal preference on color story. Next up is a new to me palette. This is the Trixie Cosmetics Horse Girl palette. This is another one similar to the Glam Light Rick and Morty where I was talking last year about how much I wanted it. I purchased this in December and didn't use it until recently. And when I tell you all, I was shook at how much I enjoyed these mattes in this palette. I was like, okay, like I was not prepared for how easily they blended because I also got the Trixie and Juno and Birch palette and I've reached for that palette a couple of times and it's been fine. Like I haven't had any issues, but these blended themselves. Like it's so pretty. I created a brown smoky eye look using these brown shades up here plus some of the other shades. Gorgeous. I also did like a hot pink look. I have been loving this. I think this palette is beautiful. I was hesitant to put it at Holy Grail when I've only used it twice in the last like 2 days. And I'm like, let me pump the brakes on that. You know, like if you're getting into a relationship and you're sort of like, whoa. It's moving a little fast. That's how I felt with this. But I honestly, if this jumped next month up into Holy Grail favorites, I would not be surprised. I really, really like this, and I can definitely see myself reaching for this more and more as we get into the warmer months because holy guacamole, it is beautiful. Last palette in this category is the Adept Cosmetics Flying Fiddles palette. This was another palette that was new for the month of February. This palette, it's so beautiful. It really is. It's so beautiful. I love the ability to do neutrally looks or to have something like a little bit more earthy. I love it. I will say I love pairing this palette with neutral mattes from other palettes because I don't think the mattes in here quite go neutral, but you have neutral shimmers, but I think they play really nicely with neutral mattes in other palettes. So is it quite perfectly a standalone palette for me? No, because I don't love a lot of, like some of the shimmers I wouldn't want to put with these mattes, but I have a gazillion palettes, so I can pair it however I want to. Anyways, and the looks I did do just using this palette, they're pretty. I really enjoyed them. I think the quality on this is amazing. It's good. Moving on to our last category, which is Holy Grail favorites. So that Flying Fiddles palette was the last new palette for the month of February. So if you're curious of like all the new palettes I tried, Flying Fiddles would be my favorite of all of them. All of these palettes that I have in the Holy Grail category are palettes that I've had for at least a little while. And they have cemented their status here. So anyways, next up first up in this category, we have the Natasha Denona Yucca palette. This palette never ceases to amaze me. Every time I reach for it, I'm like, man, I love this one. I think the color story on this is great. I think the formulas on here are great. I know people had issue with this shade Fushi. I used this in my crease, had no problem. I really like it. I also am always a fan of her cream to powder formula, so I'm not mad about it. And then the open container on this is 24 months, but I will say mine kind of smells like Play-Doh. I've had that happen on, I think, one of my Adept palettes, and I believe I was talking to somebody who said they had the same issue and reached out to the brand, and they were told it's kind of standard. It's a certain ingredient that's kind of causing that issue in the palette. So when I was using this and I was like getting real up close and personal, the smell a little bit, I was like, ooh, don't like that. But it's not that bad. I put it on my eyes and it didn't do anything, so I think we're okay. But anyways, overall, really like this color story. A lot. Next up, we have the Melt Cosmetics and Bailey Sarian collab, the Fatally Yours palette. I just love this grungy color story. I definitely don't consider this palette a standalone palette, but I'm trying not to hold that for myself in a ranking because I feel like if you're somebody that can only use one palette, I will always let you know that if I'm ranking something and I'm saying it's not quite a standalone for me, just so you can kind of mentally flag that away. But for me personally, I love mixing and matching palettes, so I think it makes more sense for me to rank things knowing that I would use this with something else. So anyways, this palette I love to mix with my special like loose pigments or melt glitters or some sort of toppers. Like I think it creates a perfect base for that, and I can just use that palette and just use the toppers and not mix it with another palette. But I also think it plays nicely with other palettes whenever I want to add some grungy depth to it. I really enjoy this. I have nothing but nice things to say about it. It's a great palette. Next up, we have the Smoky Glam palette from BellaBeauteBar. I think this is one of my favorite neutral palettes in my collection, and I know it has some greens and some purples, but that's what I like. I like a neutral with some pops of color to it so that I can, you know, mix things up a little bit. I think the shimmers in this palette are gorgeous. The mattes blend beautifully. It's a little big, but overall, I really like it, so happy with that one. Last but not least, our number one palette. If you were paying attention earlier, you already know what I'm about to say. It's the Danessa Myricks Groundwork Defining Neutral palette. I love this palette. I love it. It's one of, if not my favorite palette in my collection currently. If you haven't seen it, go look on Trendmood's page. They showed a sneak peek of the new version of this that they're launching, which is going to be called the Blooming Romance, I think. It's this, but in like a blush mauve color story, and I am so excited. I know that I'm just gonna love and adore that. I have March 19th circled on my calendar. That's when it launches at Sephora. Anyways, here's Defining Neutral. I adore this palette. I do. It's one of my favorite palettes to use. I actually had to go grab it because I have it packed in my hospital bag right now. On the off chance I want to do my makeup while I'm in labor or while I'm at the hospital, I was like, let me just bring this bad boy so then I can like contour, do brows, do my eyes, just do the whole thing and just, you know, have a little bit something. So I have to go put that back. Anyways, that was it for the month of February. I will be curious to hear your thoughts on any of these palettes down below. Before I totally exit out of here, let me tell you which palettes I used the most in February. And this is just tracking when I use them on my eyes. I use the Danessa Myricks palette all the time on my face, so I don't actually track that, but anyways. Well, I track that somewhere else. Anyways, okay. So my most used palette for the month of February was the Flying Fiddles palette. I used it 4 times in February, and then I used Cold Moon, the second most, at 3 times in the month. Here's Cold Moon again. So these were the 2 that I reached for the most. I was, you know, apparently living a little bit of a neutral fantasy. But yeah, everything else I used either 1 to 2 times throughout the month, but those 2 I reached for a little bit more than everything else. And now I think that's it. I will let you all go back on to whatever you want to do, and I will see you next time. Bye!